Hi, I'm Carmen Alana Tibbetts. Welcome to the Agosia Arts Studio. Today we're going to take a break from the art doll thing and we're going to talk about my new children's toy, which is Cactus Mouse. I get a lot of questions about making dolls for kids, and it's just not my thing, but I do know that a lot of people are interested in that, so I've designed this new little doll. So Cactus Mouse comes with a variety of accessories, including a cactus pillow and a bunch of clothing and a little book. So we're going to be talking about how to make the doll in video number 1, and in video number 2 we're going to talk about constructing all the accessories. Let's get started. To begin, I would like to point out some of the differences between some of the fabrics that you can order from Spoonflower. This is one of the basic cottons, probably the least expensive choice, and then this is the organic, well maybe it's not organic, this is the linen cotton canvas. And overall, they're pretty much the same in terms of printing quality. I think that the canvases and the linen cotton blend have a nicer texture, and they're certainly thicker fabrics, so if you want a toy that's going to last a little bit longer, this would be my choice. I mean, this is fine, there's nothing wrong with this, it's going to wash fine, they're both washable, so no problems there. I just like these thicker fabrics because I think the final toy will last a little bit longer. So when you get your fabric from Spoonflower, it's going to be nice and folded up, and you see everything that you need for your Cactus Mouse doll and his or her accessories are here. And what I've done is I've included the seam allowances in all of the pattern pieces. So the first thing that you're going to do is cut everything out. So because those seam allowances are included, you want to cut out everything just right on the dotted line. Doesn't matter if you're a little bit off to one side, that's going to be fine. Just cut them out on the dotted line. You don't need to add anything extra outside and cut outside of there. Okay? So then we've done that, and we have all of the little pieces for the doll. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the videos into two sections. I'm going to do the part for the doll first, and I'll do another video for all of the clothing and accessories in another part. Okay, so you've got all of your little pieces, and everything fits together fairly well. There might be some oddities with the way that your particular piece of fabric has been printed, but I haven't found that to be a problem in any case. So you should be okay. If there are any issues with fitting things together, it's more likely to be a problem with me designing the doll and all of the pieces. I did the best I could, and I still fiddle around with it a little bit, but by and large, everything will go together fine, and it doesn't have to be perfect. That's the great thing about this. Your doll is going to be very cute, a lot of personality, no matter what. So, the first thing that we're going to do is sew the parts for the face and the head. So, what you want to do is you'll cut out all of these pieces, and you've got the two sides of the face, and you've got the fronts of the ears and the backs of the ears. And all of the pattern pieces actually have written on them what they are. So you should be able to determine what something is. If all of these pieces fall onto the floor, you'll know what goes with what. So the first step is to put the little ear sections right sides together. And here's an example where they don't match up perfectly up at the top, but that's fine. And so what you're going to do is you're going to sew those ears, you're going to put everything right sides together, you're going to stitch 1/4 inch away from the edge, and then you'll turn them right sides out, and you'll be able to see the printing here, what pattern piece this is. And I'm just going to finger press this. I'm not too worried about it being perfectly flat. I think it looks better with a little bit of dimension, and so I just do a little bit of finger press after turning it right sides out. And then I just put a little pleat into the ear like that, and then you can just pin that in place and set these guys aside. Then you're going to put your face pieces together, and on this sample here, this is one of my first ones, so I don't actually have all of the markings on here. But on your piece, there'll be a red dot up here, and you go all the way around the face, and there's a red dot here at this corner and a green dot at this corner. So what you're going to do is stitch around the front of the face from one red dot to the other red dot. And so it's going to look something like this. So you'll see that stitching, and it's left unstitched here. And this is the neck edge. So if I open this up, and you can see those green dots here, and it says neck on there. And so you leave that unstitched because this then gets stitched to the neck. Okay, so we're going to get all of these. We'll set those aside for now. And then the next part are the arms and the legs. So they're similar except for the length. The arms have little yellow dots at the elbow joints, and the legs have red dots at the knee joints. So it's the same sort of thing. You're going to put everything right sides together, and the leg paws, I guess the soles of their feet, they have little brown markings, and the palms of the paw, they have sort of pinkish markings. So that'll also help you tell the difference between those two. So you're going to pin everything together if you want to pin. If you don't want to pin, you want to just put it together, that's fine. You're going to sew 1/4 inch around as before, and you're going to leave the top edge over here unsewn. Okay, so you're going to have a long tube essentially, and they're going to look the same except one is longer than the other. And what I suggest doing is making a little snip where you go from the wrist and it flares out into the hand. So make a little snip there that will help when you're turning the tube. It'll help make this palm area lie flat. So I would do that for both the legs. You can see that I did it here. I did that little snip, and the arms. So you're going to turn those so that they're right sides out, and they'll look something like this. So we've got our little paws here. And so then what you want to do is you want to stuff these lightly. And I don't like a lot of stuffing because I kind of like the floppy look, but you know, it's kind of up to you what you want to do. In any case, put some stuffing in there, and for the arms to move properly, what you're going to do is stuff to about where the elbow is, and then kind of stop. And you'll see the little yellow dots or the red dots for the knees, they'll show. And that's to give you a little bit of a hint where you're going to stitch. So I'm going to stop stuffing there, and then I'm going to stitch across. So I would do this for both arms, and then for the legs, I actually stuff the whole thing. But it's the same sort of thing. You're going to stuff, and then you could stuff a little bit lighter right here where you're going to stitch, and then just stitch across. And then what you want to do is turn these top sections where it's open, turn it under 1/4 inch, and you can either hand stitch that shut or machine stitch with a straight stitch and do that. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and finish all 4 of these and set these aside. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go off camera for a little bit, finish all this up, and we'll come back for the next step. Now we're ready to start sewing the body parts, and we have various things here that we set aside. And the first step is to get your ears, and we have the front that has the pink and the back that is just plain gray, and we're going to pin that to what is the body back, and at the top of what looks like kind of a gingerbread man head, which is actually the back of the head, there are 2 little white dots. So we're going to put the ears up here. We're just going to align them so that the inner edge of the ear, I'm just using the same pins, is right there along one of those dots. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So the pink will be facing out, and then the plain gray of the ear will be facing the back of the head. And what that does is that gives us a little bit of space between the 2 ears. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin that. And actually when you're pinning, you kind of want to get everything out of the way because we're going to be pinning the other head parts there, so you don't want to get anything caught in the seam allowance. So pin carefully. This is the back of the head. We're going to set that aside. Now for the front of the body piece, we have our head piece, and remember we did not sew that neck edge. So now this is going to be sewn to the neck edge of the body front, which has the little pale tummy area. So we'll just go ahead and pin that in place, and then you're going to sew that with a 1/4 of an inch seam. And right now I'm just going to pin it. I'm not going to sew everything because I'll be taking a little break here for a minute. So we've got our front and our back, and then we need to work on the tail. And the tail is a little bit different from everything else because it's not really sewn. What I did here was I decided to do kind of like a little folding job. So you want to fold one end of the tail up a 1/4 of an inch, then fold the tail in half lengthwise all the way down, and you can press that if you want. Then open it up and fold the raw edges into the center, like that, like you were making bias tape if you have ever done that. And then you're going to fold those to the inside so that you've enclosed all of the raw edges on the inside. And then what I'm going to do is just stitch right down the center. So you'll do that for the tail, and I haven't stitched this, I've just kind of pinned it. But the next step then is to pin the tail into position. And on the body back piece, there is a little blue square kind of in this little Y or V-shaped opening, and you're going to pin the tail to that. So we'll just pin it there, just like that. Not doing a good job with the pins today. Now for both the front and the back of the body, we need to form this little gusset area, and that gives a little bit of dimension to the lower body. So you're going to fold both body parts in half, like so. And I'll just go ahead and pin those shut. And you're going to do the same thing for the front. You just kind of fold it in half, and you can pin if you want to. And now I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to go and sew a 1/4 of an inch along that edge for both the front and the back piece. And I'll be right back. I finished up sewing those little gussets there, so I have the front and the back, and I still have the ears pinned in place. And so now what you need to do is you're going to pin the fronts to the backs, and on your pattern pieces there will be on one side some little yellow dots on the side, and that's going to show you where not to stitch. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin those in place now. And what I like to do is just put the tail and have it go through that opening. That's just kind of the easiest thing, because then you won't sew the tail. So we've got that. We're going to stitch all the way around, and the big issue is the head. So what you want to do is pin at the neck edge, and I'm pinning the neck seam open. So I'm going to pin that. And I'm pinning it open on both sides and matching up kind of that little curve where the bottom of the head meets the neck. And the front of the head is a little bit bigger than the back of the head. Well, I guess it's actually a lot bigger. And so you'll notice that right away. There's a lot of fabric here and not as much around here. So what we need to do is just pin fit that in place. So what I'll do is I'll open up this seam here and sort of match that between those two white dots. And I'll go ahead and pin that. And then you've got the ears here, you got to kind of finagle with them. And then maybe for half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, I'm not going to try and do any gathering there. I'm just going to pin it and sew it just flat. It's flat, no extra fabric either side. Do the same thing on the other side. And measurements aren't really important here. You're just going to kind of fiddle with it a little bit. So now we've got a lot more fabric here than we do in the back here. So what I do is I just put a couple of little gathers in there, and it doesn't even matter where they go, and just kind of pin them in. I know it seems a little crazy, but it's fine, and it's going to look pretty good actually. So you know, you can do, I would say do at least 2, and that's what this fabric wants to do. Don't fight with it. Do whatever the fabric wants to do, and it will be fine. And of course now this ear does not want to cooperate. The ear became unpinned. So, do a little more pinning, and I'll take a minute and go off and sew this, and I'm going to turn it right side out and stuff it. Now, the other option, instead of pinning this, is to do a running stitch along the top curve of the head and gather it up by hand. If you're using a thicker fabric, this is the linen cotton canvas, that doesn't really work so well. If you're using one of the thinner fabrics, it'll work out fine. Either way, it doesn't matter. If it looks sloppy here, it's going to turn out perfectly fine. So it's going to be pretty flat in the back, and then it looks pretty messy and gathered and really kind of odd in the front, but that's what you want. So I'll be back in just a sec with the doll turned right side out and stuffed. Well, we are almost done. So here we have our little cactus mouse, and here's the body and the head all stuffed. Here's the tail coming out the back. I left the opening unsewn just to show you approximately what it's going to look like. It's about 2 inches long, and then you just use a ladder stitch or a slip stitch to stitch that up. I suggest using a really strong thread like an upholstery thread or button craft. Those threads tend to be stronger and will hold up to the pretty intense stuffing that I suggest. I really like a very firm body and floppy appendages for kids' toys, because I think it gives it a little more movement. So the arms and legs are very lightly stuffed, and you can see there's a lot of cush to this, whereas the body is very firmly stuffed, and it's very important to have the neck and the head very, very firmly stuffed, because otherwise the head would start to flop around. So make sure that you stuff this area really well, and it's a good idea to stuff everything pretty tightly, and then when you're done, make sure that the base is kind of flat, because if you want this doll to sit, it needs to have sort of a flat behind to sit on. So the last step after sewing that shut is attaching the arms and legs, and you have a couple of options here. If you have a very small child, a toddler, baby, then obviously you don't want to use a button joint, in which case I would suggest this hand stitching the arms and legs on here, and it would be kind of a floppy thing, but that would be fine. For an older child, button joint is the way to go. It's really easy. They're actually really sturdy if you use the right kind of thread. For my work, I generally use waxed linen, which isn't available to most people, but if you use a really strong upholstery type thread, or button craft, it has a different kind of label than the normal sewing threads, and it's much, much thicker, you'll do fine if you use 4 to 6 threads. So what I've done is I've threaded on here doubled thread, and then I've doubled that. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through with a quadrupled upholstery thread to put these buttons on. And what you want to do is just figure out where you want your little appendage to be. And so here's the arm, and you can see I told you to stuff to the elbow and then very lightly stuff the top. And that's to give the arm plenty of movement when the child is playing with the doll. Make sure that the little palm is facing to the inside. and you can just put a pin kind of where you want it. And I didn't put any markings on the doll for this because it's kind of up to you where you want to put those different appendages. And if you like, when you're sewing this shut, you don't have to do a straight across. You could do a little rounded edge. Different people do different things. But then if you were doing this for a toddler, you would just stitch this by hand here, and this is floppy enough that the little arm can move around realistically. So I'm just using plain old shirt buttons. And this is a doll needle, but this guy is narrower enough that if you used maybe like a milliner's needle, you should be able to get through. So what I'm going to do is just going to go through where I've pinned, and you come out the other side, and you just bring your thread through, and you're just going to go through once. You don't have to go through back and forth, back and forth. That makes it more complicated. So just thread the button and back in, and go in again about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch away from that first area where the thread exited, and then come out over here, and of course I'm making a mess of it like I always do on camera. Man, oh man. Okay, so then you thread this one like so, and then you're just going to tie a really firm knot there, and do a square knot so it holds, and that's all you need for your little button joint. It'll work fine. So you're going to do that at the shoulder, and you're going to do that at the hips. Now, one thing I forgot to point out about the feet is that you've got your little knee sewn in here, and when you're sewing the top of the leg shut, it's actually sewn shut perpendicular to the seam line. And the reason for that is that the knee bends this way, front to back, but the hip moves side to side. So you'll figure that out if you do it wrong. I apologize that my instructions aren't always clear. Then the last thing you may want to do is bend the little foot up and put a couple hand stitches right there so that the feet are sort of pointed, kind of like a human foot would be, not necessarily how a mouse foot would be. But some people like to do that. It doesn't matter. You can leave it straight if you want to. And then after that, you're pretty much done, and it's on to the next step of making the clothes and accessories. I'll see you in a bit.